Let's talk about New York City and what the LES Alphabet City was like growing up, even before you got into martial arts.
Well, it's probably the reason why I ultimately did, because it was just a really tough area. And, you pretty much had to know how to fight, or you would consistently get beat up, picked on, and robbed. And, being a white kid in that area didn't really help either, and, I always laugh when people say reverse racism. There's no such thing as reverse racism. There's just racism. If you don't like someone because of their race or their color or their ethnicity, you're a racist. and they didn't like me very much because I was white. So, I pretty much, and I'm not a fast runner, so I had to learn how to fight.
Yeah.
And, it just comes a time in your life when you get tired of getting picked on, and of course that turned me into a little bit of a prick myself, and I started being like, I started being like everybody else in my neighborhood. If you were a teenager in my neighborhood and you were a boy, you got into fucked up shit. You got into trouble. You were most likely you would join a gang, or you'd wind up, hustling, selling drugs, whatever. And a lot of burnt out buildings back then. Like, I remember when I was a kid, they at all the dope spots, they'd have, like, literally they'd be selling smack out of the buildings, and the line coming out the front would, like, wrap around the corner, like around the block. And it was just business as usual. There was fucking junkies everywhere. Just a lot of crime, a lot of fucking crazy shit. So, like, when I came down here today to do this, and I'm just like, man, just a lot of really weird memories for me. I actually don't come down to this neighborhood at all unless I have to, because first of all, I have no business down here anymore, but it's still kind of, I got a little bit of PTSD, and it kind of makes me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. What streets? Well, you moved around a lot.
Yeah, I moved around a lot,
Yeah.
but I grew up on 12th and Avenue A back
Okay.
when I was little, when I was still going to school and stuff. And then, but I lived, all over the Lower East Side, and I lived in Williamsburg back when that was a real shit show. And I lived in Harlem, the Bronx, pretty much every neighborhood that sucked. I lived there before it gentrified. I was like, I was like the testing pigeon. Like, if he survives, some more white people will move in. But yeah, man, it was a fucking crazy neighborhood back then, man. It really was. And if you didn't learn how to use your hands, it just sucked that much worse.
Yeah. Yeah, not to jump around too much, but so you're living in these areas, but you were living with your mom at the time, right?
I was living with my mom and her then husband until I was 14 or 15, and then I split, and then I was like living in squats, and just like kind of bouncing around. And I hitchhiked out to the West Coast. I hitchhiked out to up north of Canada, and back to New York, and that's more or less around the time that I started my band, the Cro-Mags. And I had been playing music obviously my whole life and doing other bands and stuff, but that's really when I started laying down the groundwork for what I'm most known for, which is the Cro-Mags, and which was pretty much just
You can speak closer to the
oh,
mic. Sorry
sorry.
about that.
Yeah,
No, it's
yeah.
all good, bro.
No, and the Cro-Mags was, it was it's more or less my journal, you know, lyrically, musically. Just it was just what was coming out of me. I think the music really is an expression of the type of rage and anxiety and intensity that that it was, in my life, you know, and the lyrics they're just real, you know, they're about what was going on, you know, living in squats and stealing food, shoplifting and mugging people and doing all kinds of fucked up shit, you know. That was what my life was. So that was the ammunition I had to work with.
What was it like living in C Squat?
It kind of sucked, you know. No running water, no electricity. Most of the apartments didn't have like real walls. You had like parts of walls, and you know you had the wood, the plywood for that. You know, just like part. It was a fucking burnt out building. I mean, if to you listeners, if you've never experienced what it was like to live in a burnt out building, imagine. You know, it was a burnt out building. There was no lights, no water, no fucking nothing. In the winter, it was cold as fuck. You know, you'd find a mattress on the street. You know, if someone threw out a mattress, you scored. You know, I'd sleep with my dog, and that kept the rats away from me. And you know, I knew what bakeries were throwing out their food on what nights, and you'd go and you'd get fucking hefty bags full of donuts and shit and go back and fucking the squat, and everybody be eating donuts for the next few days. You know, it was just like a total, you know, urban Lord of the Flies fucking shit show, man. It was absolutely nuts. I mean, I'd be taking showers in the fire hydrant, you know, in February, you know, which is cold. And you know, literally shoplifting to eat. And you know, it was not easy, and it was you know, people like to romanticize all that shit. It was not great.
So you're doing that. What do you think that coming up in an area that's kind of like a war zone, and you're getting into fights all the time, and you're just going through some wild shit. And when you go home at night, to a burnt out building.
Yeah.
What do you think that did to your mind? How do you think that shaped your
Oh,
personality?
it fucked me all up, obviously. But you know, but that's where the plot thickens, you know, because like my mom was a hippie, my dad was a dope fiend and an alcoholic. So even back to my earliest childhood, you know, before I was 2 years old, there was adults shooting drugs around me and overdosing, and I was staying in dirty apartments you know, that were like drug apartments. You know, my mom was a stripper, and shit was pretty fucking nuts. So it's, you know, I'm not gonna like blame my life on my mom or my dad, but I was pretty accustomed or prepared to deal with that type of life because I had already more or less experienced it in my earliest developing brain. So, you know, yeah, you get a lot of PTSD and shit, you know. And I also, like when I was young, back in the early 80s, I did some stupid shit, and I had a hit put out on me. And as it turned out, I found out years later when they did a documentary which is premiered a few months ago about me, and it's having another premiere in LA in February. Not sure where it's going to go to, you know, HBO or Netflix or who the hell knows. I'm not going to guess, but anyway, where the fuck was I going with this?
Talking about the hit.
Yeah, well, so I found out that it was like a $10,000 hit, which back in 1980, fucking two was a lot of money. You know, so like, you know, you figure you got to be a real fuck up at 15 years old to have a fucking hit put on you, like with that kind of money. That was probably, you know, that's probably close to 30 grand or some shit if you did the math, you know, by today's standards. So,
and the hit was that dude Pigman.
Yeah, Pigman. And that shit was funny because when I put out my book, Pigman, as it turned out, well, of course, he was a member of the Hitmen, which was the gang on my block on 12th Street. They used to peddle. They were like the heroin dealers on my block, and they used to have shootouts with the Allen boys from Allen Street all the time. They were like their big rivals. And so as it turned out, Pigman was this dude Crazy Eddie, who I knew, but I didn't know he was Pigman. And so, like, you know, when they had this fucking hit on me, it was just a little sketchy because, you know, they knew me. They knew what building I lived in. You know, they knew my mother. You know, so I had to dip out of town for a little while. That was actually part of the reason I hitchhiked out to California. I was like, you know, I was like, she can't get much worse. I'm like, you know, I'm going to wind up dead, you know, if I stick around here. So what the fuck's going to happen out there? Who knows? But, you know, can't be worse than that. So I hitchhiked out there and wound up living in an abandoned brewery, Ham's Brewery. And yeah, that was a whole nother adventure, man. California was crazy. That was when I first discovered crystal meth, a wonderful invention by the Nazis. Yeah, man. I started, that was when I first discovered meth. That was 1982. I don't even think people in the East Coast knew what that shit was back then. I was 15 years old and I was shooting the shit like it was going out of style. And yeah, man, it was rough times, man. Rough times.
When you got into training jiu-jitsu, were you still on drugs?
I had actually just gotten clean. I had just stopped doing dope. And actually, Renzo's was a big part of what kept me going. You know, I had a community of people that were real badasses in my corner, you know, a place where I could go and get just all the negativity out of my system and just like sweat and get my ass kicked and fucking, and then get out of there and feel beat up enough to just like try to make it through the night, you know. Jiu-jitsu saved my life in so many ways, you know. Gave me a new lease on life. I would recommend it to anybody. You know, I always tell people I started jiu-jitsu because of fighting, and I stayed with it because of the love. You know, that thing that was missing in my life, that sense of community, that sense of that feeling of brotherhood and genuine love, no ego, just respect. You know, it gave me a place to better myself.
Yeah. It's crazy when you think about all of the stuff that you've experienced in your life. I read your book maybe 6 years ago.
Oh,
7 years ago.
shit.
And then I reread it last week because you're coming here and we're going to do this thing. And I was reading it and I was thinking to myself, how wild it is that you're not dead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because all the shit that happened.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, if you believe there's some sort of, have you ever believed in like a destiny or some sort of higher power? Like, why did that not happen? Were you able to survive all this madness?
I wish I could give you a definitive answer to that, but I think the only purpose in my having survived it would be to teach others what I've learned in the process, you know, especially my kids, because that's what parents are supposed to do. You know, I didn't have the benefit of that. My parents didn't really teach me much except how to fuck my life up. But for whatever reason, I have managed to be a positive influence on a good number of people. And that in itself, you know, makes me feel like, you know, maybe that's why I survived all this shit. And now let's not, you know, take away that I've been a real shitty influence on a lot of people too. But I think that the scales are starting to tip in my favor. You know, I think a lot of the mistakes that I made in my youth were just based on lack of knowledge and lack of self-esteem, and also when you don't have anybody in your life that believes in you, it's really difficult to do things on your own. You know, when you have a partner in your life, whether it's you know, a spouse or a friend or a team player to help push you forward and to encourage you when you lose your will, or when you're feeling like, oh, you know, I can't do this. It's like, yeah, you fucking can. Yes, you can. I believe in you. I know you can do it. I've seen what you can do. You know, sometimes that's all it takes, you know. And if there's one thing I can tell other people from my life is that, you know, don't ever count yourself out, man, because things can suck so fucking bad for quite a long time, and then all of a sudden something happens that just changes everything. And then that in itself, that makes all that other shit almost meaningless. You know, once you feel that triumph, all the defeats are fucking, they don't fucking matter. You know, if I would have given up when things sucked, first of all, I would have given up 1,000 times already. But I would not be where I am now, and I'm actually in a really, really good place in my life. I have an amazing wife. She's badass. She's a CEO of her own company. She's a fucking lawyer. She's got her shit together. I achieved my black belt. I'm a recognized musician who's had an influence on people's lives that I've never met. You know, my survival story in itself is inspired other people. Shit, man. I'm good, man.
What was the point in your life where you wanted to make a change and you wanted to be perhaps less violent, particularly like street violence and fist fighting and you know that type of shit?
That kind of, I gotta say, was one of the few things that came out of my introduction to, believe it or not, Krishna consciousness. When I was young, when I was homeless, I started eating at their free food programs, and I knew a few people who kind of got recruited into that cult, if you will. And I actually learned a lot of really important, game-changing things. Just, you know, it made me think about life in a more spiritual way, you know, and just trying not to create more negative karma, and just, you know, now let me just say, I'm not a Hare Krishna. I don't practice any religions. I do. I have learned a lot from religions, but I do not practice any. You know.
Yeah, the Hare Krishna movement was popular within New York City hardcore in particular,
bit,
right?
Yeah. I mean, it was popular. I mean, look, Rastafarianism got popular in hardcore for a minute because of the Bad Brains. I think people in general are looking for meaning in their lives, and especially young people, and especially in a movement like hardcore where everybody's so fucking wound up already, you know, and people are looking for an identity. They're looking for a purpose in their life, and you know, and I think religions have some aspects that are really positive, as far as, you know, there was once a time when, you know, people are savages, man. If you don't tell them, like, look, if there's certain things you can't do, you know, they will do some horrible shit. And, you know, long time ago, if you didn't threaten people with like eternal damnation, you know, chances are they were going to do some fucked up shit. Yeah. So, you know, I think religion has, you know, the ideas of being, you know, trying to be a better person and not doing certain things that are more morally apprehensible, you know, or morally, I don't even know if that's the right word, morally fucking horrible. All right. So religion has a good place as far as that, but I'm not into the dogma, and I'm not into the politics, and I don't know what's on the other side of death. So I think people who profess to know these things I'm automatically a little suspect of them. It's like, motherfucker, if you ain't dead, and don't tell me what the fuck happens after you die. I don't care who told you or what book you read. Like, and I'll find out when I get there.
Yeah.
You
But it's cool though that is how. I mean, at least it was probably nuts at that time period to become aware of the Hare Krishna movement, because it was probably extremely foreign to everything else in your life.
Which I think is what I needed.
Yeah.
I needed something that was extremely foreign to everything that was going on in my life. I mean, look at what was going on in my life. I needed something that was completely different, Yeah. Became a vegetarian, I started trying to pursue a path of enlightenment, Of course, I don't know how long that lasted. I mean, I guess it's still going on in its own way. I'm still pursuing a path of enlightenment,
Yeah. In terms of finding relief within things like Hare Krishna or Jiu-Jitsu, martial arts, and finding a community and stuff like that, did you find any release in just, writing the Cro-Mags music and playing the Cro-Mags music?
That shit saved my life in so many ways. I mean, for starters, I think creative people, they need an outlet. They, or they will lose their minds or fucking kill themselves. Like whether you're an artist or like or a musician or a fucking architect, whatever. If you have a creative mind, whether you're a fucking computer fucking freak, whatever your thing is, if you don't have some way to pursue what drives you, you're gonna fucking fail.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always geared towards music, and it just gave me a way to vent and to express myself. And I say blessed because it's really, unexplainable that I was fortunate enough to be able to support myself and to make an impact on enough people to where it was able to bring me up. There's millions of musicians in the world who will never achieve anything besides playing in their bedroom.
Yeah.
I actually achieved a certain level of success, traveled the world more times than I can remember, and still have strangers writing me every day, thanking me for the positive influence I've had on their life. It's all fucking pretty nuts to me.
Yeah. Why do you think it was hardcore that attracted you rather than another type of music?
Well, I wasn't attracted to hardcore. I was one of the people who created it.
Yeah.
I was into punk rock. Punk rock attracted me. Hardcore was something that we did with punk rock. I came from the generation of punks that just sped the music up and started slam dancing instead of pogo dancing, started stage diving. Ask me how stage diving started. Well, it started because at punk rock shows, people would try to sing along, and they'd get up on stage and try to sing along, and the bouncers would inevitably grab them and throw them off the stage, or more likely drag them off the stage and beat the living shit out of them and throw them off. So we would get up, sing along, and dive the fuck off before the bouncers got their hands on you. That's how stage diving started. So it was basically just a punk rock just changed into hardcore.
Yeah.
And I would have to say the first bands that really signaled that change to me were bands like the Bad Brains and Minor Threat, and a lot of those DC bands from that moment, and some of the West Coast bands like Black Flag and the Circle Jerks, and it kind of happened all over America at the same time. It was like punk rock was not ready to die yet, and it turned into hardcore.
Just naturally.
Yeah, it was just a natural progression.
And it was also you and your close friends that kind of popularized Skinhead from what was it? It was like England, right? Where you saw
I learned all about all that shit when I was in Ireland in 1980.
Okay,
but yeah, that was one of my yep. That was I gotta own that one.
So tell me about the history behind that. Like, you went to Ireland and you came across
I met a bunch of skinheads in Ireland, and like, basically, long story short, if you were a punk rocker in the 70s and '80s, you were basically walking around with a target on you. You were going to get yelled at. You were going to get shit thrown at you. You were going to get fucked with, whether it was by local gang members in my neighborhood or fucking Guidos in Little Italy or jocks in fucking high school or whatever. Wherever you were guaranteed to be on the shitty end of the stick if you were into punk rock. You walk down the street, you hear people yelling, punk rock, suck cock, and also in America, a punk is, it didn't have the same meaning as it did in England. If you were a punk in America, it meant you were, a victim in prison. It was not a positive. It wasn't a term of positivity or anything. It was just like you were a punk. Yeah, okay. So when I went to Ireland, I saw something a little different. I saw these punk rockers and skinheads. There was a riot at one of the shows we played, right? And I saw these punks and skinheads who back then used to get along. We were all on the same team, and they were like fighting with the RUC, which is like the Royal Ulster Constabulary or some shit like that. Like they were fighting with the cops like it was nothing. And we're not talking about like regular cops. We're talking about like cops with machine guns and shit like that. This is Belfast, Northern Ireland. Like the cops don't fuck around. They, it was, and the dudes that really stuck out to me were the skinheads. They just did not give a fuck. These dudes were like down to fight anybody. And I was like, this is fucking awesome. I was like, I had never seen. Look, man, on the Lower East Side back then, you were a white kid, you were on the fucking bottom of the food chain, man. You were getting fucked with. That was just how it was. Like, until you proved that you could fight, until you proved that you were a hard ass, you were fucking eating shit. That was just the way it was. And all of a sudden, I saw all these fucking white boys who were like fighting the cops and fucking tearing shit up. And I was just like, oh shit, these motherfuckers are fucking crazy. I was like, this is great. This is fucking awesome. And then they were like, they shaved my head. They were like, they're like, take this back to America, teach them about skinheads. And I was like, yes. I was like, this is fucking great. Like, I felt like I didn't have to take shit from anybody. I was like, these motherfuckers don't take nobody's shit. Fuck do I got to? So basically for me, being a skinhead back then just meant, I was done taking shit from anybody. I was there to fucking make a stand. Like I was gonna fucking fight whoever wanted to fight with me. I wasn't taking nobody's shit, and I became a problem. And that's pretty much. I came back from fucking Ireland and started shaving all my friends' heads. And before you knew it, the New York hardcore scene, which was all punk rockers, like started to slowly turn into like almost all skinheads.
Yeah,
and that's, that was the root of that. Because a lot of the other punk and hardcore scenes started kind of replicating what they were seeing going on in New York.
Yeah, didn't you leave for a period of time, come back, and it was just exploded?
Yeah, it was like I disappeared. I came back, and it was like every fucking asshole that I used to think was a total fucking, everybody that I thought was soft was all of a sudden pretending to be hard and had their head shaved. And I was just like, you punk motherfuckers think you're fucking badasses now? Like, really? It was kind of corny. It was like, all dress up, dressing up, looking the part and shit, but no real heart.
Yeah. Tell me about that era of Bad Brains, watching them. I know you're real close with them, and just the influence that band had on the time period and even to this day. It's like,
well, I got to just say that the Bad Brains, they really were the game-changing band for everybody, I think, if you ask people on the West Coast, you ask people in D.C., you ask people in New York, most of the old heads will tell you that the Bad Brains changed everything. The level of the musicianship, and it was not something we were used to.
Yeah.
And they were just a huge inspiration on me and really upped my musicianship. I'm very lucky to consider those guys my uncles.
Yeah, and their reach is so far beyond hardcore as well.
As it should be.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they always listened to other types of music for inspiration. They were actually some of the first people who got me thinking out of the box like that, you know, like turned me on to bands like Return to Forever and The Weather Report and all kinds of shit that was so out there musically. And that in turn inspired a lot of ideas for me, even though you probably wouldn't be able to tell, but if I broke it down, you would, you know. But those guys, yeah, they changed everything, man. Those guys were really special. So, but if you're checking them out for the first time, you got to go back and listen to the Roar cassette. And one of the amazing things about that is that it was recorded on a 4-track, like literally 4 tracks. They captured that session like that, and it still holds up, man.
You see their videos, and it's just so much energy in their sets.
Yeah, man, they were fucking amazing. You know, it's actually almost a shame because, like, I don't think most people will never see. There's not enough footage of them when before they got into Rastafarianism.
Really?
You know,
Wow.
they were so much more intense. You know.
Wow.
I mean, HR was amazing even then, but like I just found I liked them better when they were a punk band personally.
When you look at New York City today, which has changed so much since the New York City that it's you know, the way you describe it in your book is very difficult to imagine. Just watch a video of some sort of war-torn country and that's what it was like, type shit. And now it's what it is. What comes to mind? What does that make you feel? Because for better or for worse, that New York City was your home. That was where you came up, and that's where all your memories and who you are is linked to that place.
100%. You know what? I gotta say that, like, I'm glad that shit is over, man, because it was really fucked up. You know, I mean, all you gotta do is look at like old film footage back then. You know, like literally half the neighborhood was burnt down. You know, junkies everywhere. You know, half the fucking people I knew were, you know, prostitutes or junkies. You know, and just a lot of fucking crime. You know, racism was just so normal that it was like almost a joke. You know, like if you didn't go into other neighborhoods, you know. I mean, I did, but you know, you were always running a risk. You know, if you went into a different neighborhood, you know, you get fucked up by the locals, whatever the fuck they were. Yeah. I you know, you miss it only in the cinematographic ways. You miss it in the romanticized, like, oh, it was so special. It was so much whatever. Yeah, there was a lot of creative shit, a lot of, you know, but man, I'll take gentrification any fucking day, man. Fuck that shit, man. I don't like stepping over junkies in my fucking hallway. I'll go to fucking Starbucks and overpay for my coffee. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah. So you feel like, although it is a part of you,
It's a part of me, but you don't necessarily have to like everything that happened.
Of course, yeah.
You know, and like, you know, that's why I don't even like coming down to this neighborhood, really. You know, it just fucking it raises the fucking hairs on my fucking neck. You know, there's like too many bad things that I can't forget around here. So, you know. But again, you know, it gives me a lot of shit to write about. You know, people always tell me, you know, New York used to be so much more. It was more dangerous. It was more this. It was more that. And you know, I guess in some ways it was. You know, I remember, you know, the Summer of Sam and the blackout and all that shit. And shit, we had a lot of serial killers. We had a lot of all that crazy shit. All the drug epidemics. Blah blah blah. But you know. Fact is kids got way more guns now than they did when I was a kid. You know, you got way bigger. I mean, you know, back then, you know, you might get shot, but chances are you probably get stabbed or beat up with a a golf club or a baseball bat before you get shot. My point is kids today have different problems. They have, I'd say in some ways, worse problems.
Mm.
You know, there's a lot, I think, I don't know for sure because I'm too old to know this for sure, but I feel like there's a lot more gangs now than there used to be. And I think there's a lot more young people involved in gangs and shit like that now. I was about to say you don't have to, back then you didn't have to worry about getting shot by a 13-year-old, but then I'm like, oh no, that's bullshit. I remember someone who did get shot by a 13-year-old. So no, it's, look, man, things are just different now.
Yeah.
Kids are faced with slightly different challenges now. They don't know how to fucking interact with each other now.
Yeah.
Because they're used to fucking living on their phone. They're used to social media. They don't have the same type of people skills that I think people used to have. There's just a lot of things that I think they're desensitized in different ways. I think, there's a lot of fucking drugs now that we didn't have back then, again. So just like even the drugs have changed, the weapons have gotten better. So right there, you got bigger, scarier challenges already. And then the fact that, it's like this crazy cyber world that creates a whole nother level of anxiety and angst and social issues that kids, when I was young, didn't have to deal with at all.
Yeah.
So I'm sure this creates enough drama, trauma, and anxiety for people to fucking
need release.
Yeah. I think in some ways hardcore is more aggressive music. Let's not just say hardcore, but music that lets you release all that shit is more fucking important now in some ways. Because people don't have that sense of their community is an online community now.
Which is pretty shitty.
It kind of sucks.
Yeah, it kind of sucks.
Like kids don't fucking, we used to go out and try to fuck and get in fights, kids sit and fucking watch, porn and fucking play PlayStation now and talk to each other on their phones. We didn't have phones. We used to actually have to go and meet each other. We used to have to get on a fucking train and go someplace. Get together.
Yeah.
We couldn't fucking FaceTime each other.
Yeah.
We actually had to get the fuck together and do shit.
How were would you take the trains a lot back then?
I had no choice. Fuck am I gonna do? I didn't have a car. I still take the trains. Fucking,
because
crazy.
I talked to a lot of graffiti writers and they talk about the stick-up kid culture. Like if you're
yeah, that shit was crazy, man.
Yeah.
Shit was nuts, man. This city was absolutely fucking, But again, I don't know if it's so much safer now because you got crazy shit going on fucking now, man. Me and this fucking Chinese delivery dude got fucking got beat up and pistol whipped in my neighborhood not that long ago. I'm like, what the fuck does he have on him? People pay with credit cards. He ain't even got like cash on him, motherfucker. Like, what are you getting from this dude?
Yeah.
Fucking chicks getting set on fire on the subway and shit. You want to talk about crazy shit? This happened last week.
Yeah.
You know
what it is? I don't follow the news whatsoever.
Bro, I try not to.
Because when you do, you see chicks
I'm
getting
like,
set on
what
fire.
the fuck, man?
Yeah.
I mean, New York has gotten soft in a lot of ways, but, at the same time, I see an increase in crazy shit. When I was a kid, most of the crazy shit that happened was money-based crime. Whether they were trying to mug you, trying to sell you drugs, or prostituting, or whatever the fuck crime they were committing, it was because they were trying to hustle.
Yeah.
Now, most of the shit that happens in the city is just crazy motherfuckers doing stupid shit that doesn't even make sense. Like that dude setting fire to that chick. It's like I see more crazy stuff on the streets now than I used to. Back then, there was, like I said, it was a hustle. It was about a means to an end. It was about survival. Now you just got a lot of fucking mentally disturbed motherfuckers and mentally deficient, people walking around.
Yeah, and that stuff is scary because it's not rational.
Yeah.
So you don't really have to do anything wrong.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The other day, and look, man, I'm a fucking black belt, and I've had many fights in my life. Other day I got out of fucking I moved into 2 different subway cars on train just because I was like, you know what? This shit's getting weird. This motherfucker like looking at me a little too hard, a little too long, and I don't even want to deal with having to fuck this dude up. Like, they ain't nothing worth it to me. I ain't got shit to prove. I want to get where I'm going. You know? Yes, most likely I could fuck this dude up. What happens if he pulls out a knife and sticks me with it while I'm trying to talk sense to him? Fuck this shit. Doors open. I'll get out and get in the next fucking car. Fuck do I care?
Yeah.
Yeah. My days of proving shit, you know, I'd like to think they're over.
Yeah.
You know.
When and how did you first become aware of jiu-jitsu as a martial art, which is a huge part of your life now?
Well, obviously, when I was a kid, I used to see ads in the back of comic books for jiu-jitsu and stuff. But, you know, this was when I was a little kid. I didn't know anything, didn't know what it was. First time I ever saw it being used was UFC 1 and UFC 2. I actually rented them on VHS from a Blockbuster because this was like literally, there hadn't been a UFC 3 yet. So it was like, it was that early in the game. And I was thoroughly impressed. I've been in my share of street fights in my life, and you know, obviously I've punched a few people, kicked a few people, and everything else, but I had never seen anything like an arm bar, and I had never seen anybody use their clothing to choke someone. I had never seen a sweep. You know, all these things were really new, and I was like, oh my God, like this stuff is nuts. If I ever have the opportunity to learn this, I'm going to jump on it. And I started looking, and I was lucky that in 96, Renzo Gracie opened up his first academy in New York City, and I found an ad in the back of, I believe it was like Black Belt magazine or something like that. And I went down there and met Renzo, and there was no turning back.
How different was the scene back then in terms of martial arts and what people knew, what people didn't know?
It was a completely different world. I'll start by saying it was not the type of family-friendly sport that it has become. There were no kids programs and things like that. Pretty much if you were looking to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back then, you were somebody who was either a bouncer or was pursuing MMA, or you were just somebody who really liked to fight. There was no middle ground. It wasn't like, I'm going to learn this sport and I'm going to, you know, it was not, it didn't have the people at the academy were tough. They were all tough people. It wasn't, you know, like when new people walked in, everybody on the mats would like turn and look, and you could just, you know, it was like, wah, 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 wah. It was like, you know, where you from type shit, you know, like, you know, you couldn't bring in cameras or videotapes or anything. You would get thrown out quickly. And it was just a really tough environment. I mean, this is back when Renzo was still fighting in Pride FC, and Ryan Gracie was in town all the time. And, you know, the early days, you know, and I'm really lucky to have been a part of it. You know, it was undescribable, total savages.
So when you walked into that gym, you were already aware of who the Gracies were, who Ryan was, who Renzo was, and the rest of the family and the history? Or?
I did not know that much. Pretty much at that time, I don't think anybody did. The only one that we all knew was Royce. All I knew was Gracie. I knew the Gracie name. I didn't know anything about the history. I didn't know anything. I just knew that I wanted to learn ground fighting. I wanted to learn submissions. And Renzo was just such a welcoming person, you know, from the first time I met him. He made me feel at home. And I was never a very disciplined person. I ever have never really did well with authority figures, and Renzo was just made you so comfortable that I never felt like, yeah, well, yes, he's my authority on so many things, but I always felt like it was more of a friend or a mentor. It was just, I am really lucky to have met him at that point in my life. I have no problem saying that I love Renzo Gracie 100%. He's one of the greatest people I've ever met.
Yeah, and such a great representation of the art of jiu-jitsu, both in pure grappling standpoint, like ADCC style thing, but also in no holds bar, Vale Tudo, where you can do pretty much everything. And then up to, gi jiu-jitsu as well. It's just his style is very universal. And I think that that's very important.
Well, it just translates to everything. And you got to remember, he used to fight, not just MMA, but like in the streets where it actually really matters, like where your life depends on it, So I'm sorry, but that gives you an edge. You develop certain instincts from real situations that, a lot of athletes may not even have, just because they don't understand life and death. The most dangerous person in the world to me is not, a black belt on the street. It's someone who's just, some dude with a knife who doesn't care about anything, because that person will walk up and stab you from behind. But, someone who's already gone through the process of becoming a black belt has done enough work in their life to not have much to prove on the street. You know what I mean?
What kind of growth went down in your life in the process of becoming black belt?
It definitely mellowed me out a lot. And it's such a philosophical sport. You really apply the same. You apply it to everything. I mean, it's really the art of problem solving. Yeah. And when you realize that you can weather the storm and just look for the right opportunities and make your move, that really translates into life. Learning how to pace yourself, learning how to, the determination that it takes. I mean, most people don't make it to blue belt, and if you can take the ass whoopings that it takes just to, to get to brown, to get to black, that says a lot about your character, so you learn a lot in that process. If you have too much ego, you're probably not going to make it. You can't take the lumps and come back with humility.
Yeah. What was the academy like? You hear stories about how Renzo Gracie gym was above a methadone clinic, right?
Yeah. It was nuts, dude.
Yeah, nuts all over the place. And also, I guess this is the late 90s.
Yeah.
There was still challenge matches going down where people come in off the street, do that type of shit.
There was.
What would happen with that?
Well, usually, like say if one of us, actually on a couple of situations, people had fights there with people that they had beefs with, and after hours and stuff like that. And, Renzo was cool with it as long as we, as long as we videotaped it and, I had at least one representative from the academy there to make sure nothing stupid went down. And pretty much the three rules were, make sure someone's there, make sure you get it on camera, and make sure you win.
There's no gloves, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, whatever rules you decided to go by, But, it was a different time,
When I first became aware of it, I was telling you before I was boxing. Mm-hmm. I witnessed some scuffle go down like outside. But actually, even in my boxing gym, I witnessed 2 or 3 brawl. I guess it turned into a brawl and they weren't boxing no more. They were really mad at each other. All 3 times they went to the ground. But I never really thought about ground fighting at that point because I associated the karate, gi, the kimono, anything that looked like that with just hyper traditional martial arts, which I have respect for. but it wasn't really what I was looking for. You know what I mean? So then I witnessed some fight go down. I got interested in jiu-jitsu, and I stayed up at night just watching the Gracie in action videos. And I was like, wow, what's impressive about those is that it's the same outcome every time. It's like takedown, mount to the back, or they fuck up the takedown, usually full guard, sweep, mount to the back. And almost all of them ended in either rear naked choke or arm bar. I don't think the triangle was around at that time. And I was like, wow, this is fucking something. This is the same thing every time. And it's not a mistake. Even, you know, how dudes would think it was a fluke and shit. So I was like kind of a little bit scared to go into my gym because I'm like, well, I'm about to be like that dude right there. So I went the next day and I had no idea what to expect. And some little kid, I think he was an orange belt or something like that.
So literally a little kid.
Yeah, he was a little kid. And I was pretty fucking diesel at the time because I had been working out like a lot of calisthenics. And I think he tapped me with chokes at least like 3 times in 5 minutes. And I was thinking about it from like a fighting standpoint, less than like, oh, he got like this point, or oh, he won the match. I was kind of thinking of it as like he's literally asphyxiating me. Like, this is crazy.
You could have been dead.
Could have been dead.
A puddle of urine.
Yeah. And then ever since then, I was like, kind of became completely obsessed. Then you learn the nuances of the sport. But within the last 2 years, I would say, of training, I became aware of the fact that, like, wow, I've been training for me, it feels like a long time. And like, no one's throwing strikes at me. We're doing positions where like this wouldn't work if they could just snuff me. Mm-hmm. So then I started getting into that whole part of it.
I think we talked about this earlier, training against strikes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Which then brought me back to the Gracie in action videos, UFC 1, Pride, Ryzen, all that shit. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, wow, it's a bit stylistically different is what I'm trying to get at. How do you feel about that, being around since 96, training jiu-jitsu, seeing what it was then, which was a very respected martial art in the scene, which it still is today, just in a different way, to what it is today, where it's like a lot of sport-specific techniques, which are pretty innovative, and they're cool, and they're good, and they're very technical, but some of these moves just lose their efficiency if someone snuffs you, you know?
Agreed. The jiu-jitsu has different aspects to it, obviously. You know, there's the sport jiu-jitsu, there's MMA jiu-jitsu, and then there's street fight jiu-jitsu. Because even MMA, although it's closer to street fight, there still are rules. There's still a referee, and there's still the ability to tap. And also, let's not forget that gloves make it a little bit easier to hold someone's wrist. It's a lot harder to yank your hand out when you have a glove that people can hold your wrist, and then the glove is preventing the hand from just slipping through. So, you know, all these things come into play. Now, also, the fact that MMA has evolved so much. In the beginning, jiu-jitsu was such a dominating force because nobody understood grappling. No one understood the details of what could be done on the ground. Even if people would come in and try to do some grappling, they didn't have a lot of knowledge. You know, now it's like everybody has some kind of a base in jiu-jitsu if they're doing MMA. You have to. You need to know how to do sweeps. You need to know takedowns, takedown defense. I mean, we saw this even as stand-up guys started learning, like guys like Chuck Liddell and like guys who were really great stand-up dudes, but only knew like takedown defense. You know, was it Anderson Silva? He was just really good at getting back to his feet. You know, like guys who. You know, so if you learn enough jiu-jitsu to deal with certain things, you know, that's more or less where MMA is now. It's just like they're athletes. It's different. MMA is not, it's not a real fight. I kind of lost myself in the.
Just a quick side note for my curiosity: do you consider Kimura a fight ender?
It can be. You know, I mean, against somebody who doesn't know any jiu-jitsu, you can get away with a lot of things. You know, and yeah, absolutely. A Kimura will end a fight from different positions. That absolutely. I mean, Matt Serra is like the king of Kimuras, man. He will Kimura the shit out of you from just about anywhere, and believe me, you will go home without an arm. You know, he loves the Kimura. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I mean, I was at blue belt at the same time as him and John Danaher, all those guys. We were all blue belts at the same time. The only difference is, well, besides the fact that those guys are amazing and I suck, is that I'm a musician full time and those guys were full time pursuing a career in the sport of MMA. So,
Yeah.
you know.
So you came up with Matt Serra. You came
Oh,
up
yeah, that's my
alongside
fucking homie.
at Renzo Gracie with GS. You saw GSP
Oh
there.
shit, yeah, man! I got
Who else?
pictures.
Jake Shields.
All those. I got pictures of my kids growing up with all those dudes since they were like 6 months old till they were like, now they're in their 20s. And
Danaher.
I've known all of them since the fucking early 90s. I mean, 96 is when I got down, and like those guys all came rolling in like right after me. You know, I remember being on tour and coming home, and those guys were all on the mats, and I'm like, and the funny shit is I don't ever remember Danaher or the Serra brothers even being white belts. I came home from tour and they were already blue belts, and I was like, who the fuck are all these new blue belts?
Yeah.
I was like, I was like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah.
But yeah, man, Matt is just a fucking pisser, man. He's one of the funniest guys on earth, man.
Yeah.
Like, you hang out with him for like 10 minutes and your face hurts and you feel like you did like 1,000 fucking sit-ups just from laughing.
I listened to his podcast and I laughed.
He's a fucking pisser, man.
Yeah.
Love that dude.
What was tell me about your relationship with the legendary late great Ryan Gracie?
Oh God.
What
man.
that was like.
I miss that fucking guy so much. I don't even know where to start. I mean, he's kind of like a legend or a myth at this point. You know, it's like, I think he was I was going to say very misunderstood guy, but I don't know. I mean, you either feared him or you feared him, hated him, or loved him. And I loved him. He was a really good friend. And I mean, like, he'd get off the plane and come straight to my house before I'd even go to see Renzo, have dinner, and, we were pretty fucking tight. But, it's just like, he was a really tough motherfucker. And like, when you come from a place like Brazil where you have to like, you got a name and a rep, you kind of have to back it up. And that shit can become difficult, It's funny because his favorite song was A Boy Named Sue by Johnny Cash, which is, for those of you who don't know the song, it's about a guy who had to fight his entire life because his name was Sue. And he became a really tough motherfucker. And Ryan had to fight his whole life because his name was Gracie. So I guess that's part of the reason why he identified with that song. And yeah, man, great fucking guy. If he loved you, man, you had a friend for life. If he hated you, you had a fucking problem.
Yeah, he would fight with a lot of aggressiveness, a lot of fury, a lot of consistent attacks. His
Bro,
fights
he
in
would
Japan
fight
were
on
gnarly.
sight. If he didn't like you and he saw you, forget about it. He fucking fucked Waleed up in the parking lot one time. I mean, he was just he was a special human being, a real motherfucker. I guess he knew we had a similar spirit,
So you still practice today?
Yeah.
How does it feel after all these years still practicing?
Oh, it feels great. It feels great, man. This shit keeps me happy. Today I was doing stand-up. I didn't do any grappling today. I was just working on striking and shooting and sprawling and combinations and just like working on my cardio and just like combinations and stuff. Eli Evangelista is my stand-up coach. He's a black belt, also a MMA fighter. He's belt holder in different organizations, and he's tough as fuck in his 20s. I have no business fucking with someone like him, but he raises me up to a higher level.
Yeah, you also had some MMA fights, right? Were they MMA or the Vale Tudo? What was the rule?
It was
set?
more or less Vale Tudo because it was like gloves were optional, headbutts were legal, all that shit. But this was before MMA was even a sanctioned sport in New York. You know, these things would take place in academies and boxing gyms after hours, and basically the fighters would sell tickets and get a cut of what they would sell. It was some real shady shit, but I had fun. But then I saw a couple fights that ended really badly, and I was like, I don't know, man. Like I saw a couple dudes who just had that old school, like they look like they got beat up by like Tank Abbott or like some shit. Like they just look like broken furniture, and the place is just like dead silent. And I'm like, don't they have medics? And that's when I was like, okay, maybe this is not the fucking the greatest idea I ever had. But I figured the only way to really learn, if you're, the only way to test your takedown skills is to try them on somebody who's actually trying to punch you in the face with some intent. Mm-hmm. So I got some takedowns and lost some fights, had a good time.
Respect, man. That Valley Tudo shit's no joke.
Yeah, you got to be a little fucked up in the head, man. But you know what? I used to fight a lot when I was a kid. So for me, the idea of being able to punch someone in the face and not get arrested for it is kind of cool. It's just that, like I said, I saw a couple people that definitely wound up with some serious fucking brain damage, and like they didn't even have the proper medical in this. In these underground combat league situations.
Yeah.
But